This video is brought to you by our friends at Aura. Do you know there's a victim of identity theft every 7 seconds? That is a headache that you don't want to deal with. So if you'd like to avoid having your identity stolen while preventing financial loss and fraud, listen up. Aura monitors your registered financial accounts and personal information online and automatically alerts you to any suspicious activity via email or text. It's that simple. You're backed by $1 million in insurance for eligible losses from identity theft, and Aura's US-based recovery specialists will help you understand and resolve any issues they find. There's individual and family plans available, so you're free to choose what works best for you. Get serious protection from identity theft and financial fraud now by visiting aura.com/Chael or click on the link in the description below. The rankings, guys. The rankings have struck again. And you got to understand, I don't know of anybody that could be out there, but I think I'm number one. I think I'm number one in talking about the rankings and the problems with them. Now, where that is a bit of contradiction by me, I love the rankings. I love that they exist. I remember where I was. I remember the year. I remember the first time they even said we're going to do rankings. They hadn't even done them yet, but they decided we're going to do them. They will be here next week. And as a guy who needs things to talk about, I don't take any days off. There's great topics out there. There's bad topics out there. There's easy ones. There's tough ones. I still got to talk. And I just remember how important that was to me, where it's like a sign of celebration, because now I will have definitely a controversy as well as a jumping off point for dialogue. So that's just why it was kind of personal to me, but it's also why I remember specifically where I was when I got this news. Now, I had no idea that the rankings were going to become such a problem with the fighters. The fighters have nothing to do with the rankings. Broad stroke statement. It should not and was never intended to matter or mean anything in forms of your negotiation, reasons to fight or not to fight, based on the idea of being in line with other sports, which all carry rankings. It was meant for people like me to have something to talk about. But the athletes don't understand the rankings. My first problem with the rankings is that people have used it as a way to not go out there and compete. It seems like there just every day keeps being something new that keeps guys from wanting to compete in a sport that at one point in their life they dedicated themselves to and begged for an opportunity to be able to compete in. That's frustrating for me. I've used that frustration to then turn on the rankings. I'm just trying to disclose for you guys, I really like the rankings. I believe in the rankings. We got to have rankings. The rankings has to have some level of sense. Look, when I tell you the fighters don't know what the rankings mean, they truly don't. If you're a top 10 guy, you're not going to be fighting for the belt. If you're in the top 10, you must get into the top 5. Once you're in the top 5, you do not have to get to 3, 2, or 1. Anybody in the top 5 is eligible to fight for the championship. So the rankings don't really come 1 through 10. There's 2 categories, not 10. There's a top 10 and there's a top 5. It's very important that fighters understand this because they don't. Look, Corey Sandhagen is a really wonderful example of this. Corey Sandhagen lost his last fight. Corey Sandhagen this morning signed a contract that his next fight will be for the championship. But Corey kept himself in the hunt. He's a top 5 guy. Even with losing his last fight, he's in the top 5. He is eligible. His phone may not have been the first to ring. But whenever it rang, he answered it and said yes. So first off, I don't think that guys fully understand how rankings work and why rankings matter. Secondly, the rankings have now moved Jon Jones number 2 pound for pound and put Kamaru as number 1 pound for pound. That is so glaringly obvious. It is blinding how obvious that Kamaru Usman is the best pound for pound fighter in the world. It is obvious. The fact that Jon was at number 1 while not having fought not having an active contract to fight and is not licensed in any jurisdiction in the world is bizarre. What's different between Jon Jones and George St. Pierre? They both go to the gym. They're both still practicing. They're both going to the media. They're both looking around for fights. George real interest in Khabib Nurmagomedov as recently as 14 months ago. George interested in De La Hoya as recently as right now. But what's the difference between the two of them? Why is George not eligible to be ranked? Why is Jon? I mean, not my jumping off point, but something to think about. Now, if you're going to move Jon down a spot and you're going to move Kamaru up a spot, one of them must have fought. Kamaru must have had a fight between the last ranking that said he wasn't number one, and he must have looked so good that it elevated him a spot. Well, no, that didn't happen. And Jon, who lost a spot, must have had a competition, win or lose. He must not have looked good enough by the decision makers to maintain the number one spot. Well, no, that didn't happen. As a matter of fact, nothing happened. Nothing happened with either one of those athletes. And the only other athlete to move in the pound-for-pound rankings was Volkanovski. It would make a level of sense that Volk would move, considering he had a performance that was amazing. That makes sense. How would you drop Jon a spot if Jon didn't lose? Even compete. Right? You can win and not hold your spot in the pound-for-pound rankings. That's not what it's about. But without competing at all, how could you possibly fall, particularly underneath a guy who also didn't compete at all?